Hi, everybody. We are sending our best wishes to Jen, and I'm going to do my best to step in for her in the beginning of the show and at the end. But right now, I would like to say hello to Hawk. And hi, Hawk.
Hi there. And there's Beecher, who you know Stephen and Bob.
Yes.
Would you like to say anything, or can I get going?
Well, just welcome to Stephen and tell him how much we appreciate him joining. And he's an old friend and acquaintance of ours, has written about us in the past, and just appreciate him joining with Hulk.
Thank you. I'm thrilled. Really thrilled.
I am too. And I mean, this man has such a career. There's no way in an hour are we going to be able to cover everything, but we're going to try. Stephen's been a journalist. He's been the executive editor of the Hollywood Reporter. He's been a producer. He's produced for the Hollywood Reporter, the Hollywood Masters series, and Close Up with the Hollywood Reporter. He's been an actor. We're going to find out about that, Stephen. Watch out. He's been an author. He's a book about a recent best-selling book with Laurence Olivier and Vivien Leigh, a book about our dear friend Sherry Lansing, signed. I got a signed copy and read it a long time ago. He's now an educator, the Dean of Media Arts and Film at the Dodge College at Chapman University. He's also been a big proponent of diversity in our industry, working with Big Brothers and Big Sisters of Los Angeles and several others. This man knows our industry, and I'm just happy to have him with me. Welcome, Stephen.
Oh, thank you so much, Hawk. It's really lovely to be with you.
Hey, Hawk, can I just give a shout out to Stephen? Chapman named #4 school film, school in the country.
I saw that. It was #8. And then they announced Stephen as the dean. It went to 4 immediately.
Well, it was gradual. Yes, but I'm very, very proud of everybody here.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Good. So we're going to get going here, and let's start with where did you grow up, and what did you think you wanted to do in your life as a youngster?
I grew up just outside London in a town called Maidenhead, and I fell in love with film very early. And of course, I loved writing. I loved and still love great acting. And I actually started acting when I was 13 in the West End on British television. And I remember the very first thing I did, a musical about Queen Victoria and Prince Albert at the Piccadilly Theatre, and watching John Schlesinger direct. And as you know, this is the director of Midnight Cowboy, among other films, Marathon Man, which I really love. And
you may not know this. I was the assistant director on Marathon Man, and I produced one of his greatest movies.
Which one?
Honky Tonk Freeway.
Oh, wow, right. That was a very expensive movie. I hate to say it flopped, but...
Oh my God, it was awful, but we sure had fun.
But it was...
John was a great guy. So, but wait, you did all this... You skipped to 13. You acted in, like, what was going on with your parents, and were you waving a flag and going, I want to act, or how did that happen?
My parents were very scared about it, especially my mother. They thought I would be uneducated and, drop out of school and everything. Neither of my parents had been to university. My mother did later in life, went back and then became a teacher. She's a Holocaust survivor. So there was a lot of insecurity in her background, but education was incredibly important to both of them. And so they were very anxious about this. And I remember the principal of my school, who's an extraordinary man who'd been a war hero. Back in World War II, people would become, captains on ships at 21 years old. And he called me to his office and said, I'll always let you have time off to act on one condition: that your school grades don't get any worse. And I remember being so worried about this that I did the opposite of most child actors. I suddenly started preparing for every exam. And suddenly that year, I think I was first in 4 or 5 subjects, and I had never been even close to that before. And that became my identity. So
wow. And were you watching movies? Were you going to the movie theater? Was there a favorite film that turned you on, or an actor?
But you know, as a teenager, all the films you see have such an effect on you. And the BBC would show them, like every young person, and I'd run out, get the magazine, build my entire week around what was showing, see, you know, festivals of films, and then what to say when I went to university. There were a few films that had a huge effect. They weren't necessarily Hollywood films, although William Wyler's great films I always loved. I loved Visconti, I loved Renoir, I still do. Nothing shapes you as much as the films you see probably between, you know, 11 or 12 and 25. And then it's kind of sad, because then your views on what you like become hardened. And I'm always trying to say, keep an open mind.
Yeah, they're not making some of those anymore.
It's harder when you look back at what they did, particularly in the 70s, and you see the number of great films, by the way, many of which you worked on. I think you worked on Chinatown, didn't you?
Yes.
There are fewer, but there are still great filmmakers around. A lot's gone to streaming.
Yeah. So I know you're the dean, but if somebody asked you to act again, or are you open for if I want to cast you in something?
The answer to that is no, categorically. The students sometimes ask me. I talk about miscasting the pirate captain in a student film. And I'm terrified. And what I said to them is, I'll act in anything as long as I don't need to learn any lines, because the very thought of learning lines makes me sweat bullets, you know.
All right.
But I am emphasizing acting here. We've hired Russell Boast, who's a great casting director, president of the Casting Society of America, to be our head of casting. And I'm trying to emphasize with all the students, you know, the acting and the story are the things that matter most.
Yeah.
Technical stuff, you will learn, people forgive, but the story and the acting must be there. Well,
you're absolutely right. And I think I've told you one of my grandsons went to Chapman. He was an editor before he got there. He's now about to become a full editor at 26. Wow. He's been the assistant editor on Only Murders in the Building, which is a very good show.
It is.
And what I always said to him in the same way, I said, yeah, go ahead and take all the film classes, but take English, because you need to learn how to tell a story. And no matter what actor, director, whatever, if you know how to tell the story, you're there.
I completely agree. You're going to learn more from reading Dickens and Heart of Darkness and Virginia Woolf about storytelling. You know, I was reading, I've been reading an interesting book called Reading Lolita in Tehran, which is about an English professor with a small group of students trying to study the great canon during the Islamic Revolution. And you read some of the dialogue in The Great Gatsby. There's this extraordinary moment where Gatsby is with Daisy and she looks at him and says, "You look so cool." And then she says again, "But you always look cool." And Fitzgerald said, what she said was, "I love you." And it's great film dialogue, because
I just got the chills.
It absolutely. And her husband's jaw drops slightly as he realizes what his wife has been saying. And it's brilliant, and it can teach just as much. Dialogue shouldn't be telling you, hitting things on the nail. It should be disguised. It should run against what we're seeing visually. You can learn far more from those texts or great screenplays.
Right. Wow. Very smart.
So I'm always encouraging students, get a general education. And by the way, go and do something, push yourself, go and do a semester abroad, take a trip to Africa. Join the Peace Corps for a couple of years. I love the students to get
life experiences.
I love the students to get jobs at CAA when they come out or whatever. But if you want to be an artist, you need human growth, not just resume growth.
Yeah, I totally agree. So because you got good grades, you went to Cambridge.
Yes.
And then I understand that you got something called the Harkness Scholarship, which is the British version of the Rhodes Scholarship. And that brought you to the US. When you got here, did you immediately go to AFI, or what did you do with that award?
Oh my God, here's my dirty secret. I went to USC and I dropped out.
USC Film School or USC?
USC Film School. And I don't blame them. I was extremely unhappy. It was a complete shock to my system, going from a British university to an American university, going from England to LA, back in the early 80s, very different place. And I met Martin Ritt, one of the great directors, and he said, come and work with me. He did Norma Ray, Spy Who Came In From the Cold.
Wait, slow down. I was at president of Raystar in 83, 84, 85.
Oh, wow. He was very close to Raystar.
And Marty Ritt was downstairs. His office was downstairs from mine. Were you there then?
No, I was when he was doing Cross Creek and then briefly Murphy's Romance in the early 80s. So probably, was that later?
I don't know, I gotta look it up. But
and you know, this is a great, first he'd been an actor, worked with Kazan, had been best friends with Kazan until the blacklist, then Marty was blacklisted. But he was one of the great actors, directors, partnered with years. And it was wonderful.
Every morning before going up to my office, I would go into Marty's office and listen to stories.
Wow.
Oh my God. Jeez.
Oh, it was an amazing privilege for me. And I still have a photo of him on my little notice board at home. And people sometimes come by and say, who is that? It's so sad that some of these great people have vanished from memory.
Oh, not me. By the way, if you watch that great documentary called The Last Movie Stars about Joanne and Paul, there's a bunch of stuff about Marty Ritt.
I heard it's terrific, the Ethan Hawke documentary. I'm dying to watch it.
It's very worthwhile for everybody at the home too. Bob, Freda, make sure they can get that. I think they'd love it at the home.
It's so interesting because I never knew the things that
you worked with Marty, and then how did you get to AFI from there?
Oh, then I'd been accepted by AFI, so then I went there for 1 year. And then my visa ran out, which happens with a lot of our international students. And I moved to Paris for a few years and worked in French television. I know, it sounds terrible. But you know, it's great living in a garret. It's not great for several years living on literally $500 a month. And not a certain 500. I don't know if you've ever been there, Hawk, but the anguish that creates even when you're young. And by the way, as you know, what got me into education was working with young kids in South Central LA. And I was privileged, I've always been, but when you don't have the money to pay for gasoline for your car, and when you live in complete uncertainty, it's a horrible thing. One of the difficulties in our business is there's so little security in it. And I wish we would look at that, you know, as a commonality and say, how can we increase job security for people? Because it's just too difficult for many people to live like that.
I couldn't agree more. Were there students at the AFI when you were there that became lifelong friends and creators that we might know?
Yeah, I don't think anything become gigantic. David Arata, who's a screenwriter. There were a few, but almost all of them are working the business, and you run into them. You know, I think it's funny that students don't realize that a lot of people they're working with now will become active players in the industry. And then as you're going up, they're going up. And it was a funny thing when I started as a reporter, I know all the low-level people. And little by little, they went up in the industry. And I was the reporter for so many years. Some of the other people said, I wish we had your contacts. Well, those guys become studio chiefs, and then they move on. And suddenly all your contacts have actually left the business. You know, but yes, everybody you meet when you're young, they become very active.
So you had been in front of the camera, you'd been behind the camera at AFI now. What turned you to journalism?
I needed a job, and there were two jobs. One was being a script reader at Universal, which is a job I really wanted. And then the other job was being an assistant at the Herald Examiner, which then was the #2 paper after the LA Times. I didn't get the first job, and I did get the second one. And looking back, it combined two of my passions, writing and film. And so what happens is when you start doing something reasonably well, you get opportunities. And I'm always torn on what advice to give to young people. Do you absolutely follow your dream and let go of these other opportunities? Or do you say, oh, I'm really good at this, I should follow that path? Because for years, it filled me with pain that I wasn't directing film. And then at some point, I can't even explain it, it just vanished. And writing became much more important to me. And education in my later years became extremely important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've always said, live your dream, but also do what you do best.
Yeah, and they're not always in sync. By the way, one of the most extraordinary things, as you know, about our jobs, we meet a lot of high-level people in the industry. It's amazing how many have another dream. You know, I remember one of the top executives at Disney, one of the very, very, very top women left. And I did a sort of exit interview with her. And what she said is basically, but what I really want to do is direct, you know.
She told me the same thing.
Yeah. It's extraordinary. And often you'll meet these people who had great success and they're a bit bored.
Right.
And they're making a ton of money, and yet they're making money. You're paid when you've learned to do something really well. One of the things our society doesn't do is look at people who are middle-aged and give them the opportunity to have a complete career change. And I was very lucky. I got that in coming to Chapman. But I wish society allowed that, because people who've done something for 20 years, they might be very good at it, but they can also be a bit bored with it.
Yeah. Well, you were there for almost 30 years at the Reporter. Is there a scoop that you exposed, a story that changed the life of a human or a company that you feel very proud of, that helped along the way? Is there one, or maybe many? But
a lot of what I did was creating things like our roundtables, and it's lovely when I speak to young people who are very influenced by what they saw. I always found those confrontational stories difficult to write. I've done a few, but you suddenly expose something. You know, my colleagues Matt Bellany and Kim Masters are terrific at this, and they're fearless. And I never felt comfortable with that. And I think it was my great weakness as a journalist. You know, I've seen the things people have written about Harvey Weinstein and the Me Too movement, which are just extraordinary. And I wish I'd done more of those. My regret as a journalist is not the stories that I wrote where I was tough. It was the ones I didn't write because it made me uncomfortable to be too tough.
Well, that's great. That's great that you can know that about yourself. That's, as I know, because you spoke with my wife, Molly, the Jungian analyst.
Yes, I really loved your wife. I'd love to get together with her.
She's listening right now.
Oh, good. Oh, please set something up. But there are different types of journalists. My joy was in doing the profiles and really exploring people psychologically. You know, I remember writing a profile about George Clooney that turned out to be fascinating, because the Clooney that you see on the screen wasn't the Clooney that I felt he was. And, you know, that he was a much more insecure person, driven. I love him. He's incredibly moral and concerned about society, but he wasn't the glad-handing frat boy, ultra-confident person you see. By the way, as you know, movie stars are rarely the way they come across on the camera.
Yes, well, we'll get to in a minute. I want
your stories. You know more than I do.
Get to your book. But I have maybe people have heard this, but my first job, I had to go get Natalie Wood out of her trailer.
Oh.
And this was in a place called Bay St. Louis, Mississippi, on a movie called This Property is Condemned, with Natalie and a young actor named Robert Redford and Sidney Pollack was directing. It was a Tennessee Williams short story. And I went to the trailer and I knocked on the door and I said, we're ready for you. And she yelled from inside the trailer, I'll be out in a little while. And I don't know where it came from, but I said, oh, well, James Wong Howe, Oscar-winning cinematographer,
great
Wong Howe, said, the light is perfect. She opened the door, she took my arm, and we walked up to the set. And everybody said, how did you get Natalie Wood out of her trailer? She never comes out of her trailer on the first ask. And I said, well, I told her the light was perfect. I've used it for every actor in my entire career. And it works. The insecurity, it works. So,
yeah, they're very insecure, but also going back to what we were saying, it's an insecure business. And
yes.
So here you are, you finally made it to stardom. You're getting enormous paycheck. You're getting people treating you like God, and it can all go away with one flop.
And by the way, in today's cancel culture, even faster than it used to. Unbelievable.
I mean, look at these people in television like Matt Lauer, gone. Woody Allen can't make another film. Harvey in prison, rightfully. Everybody knows success is fragile in this industry.
Kevin Spacey.
You know, you're running a studio one day, you're unemployed the next. I'll never forget going to a big gala after Alan Horn had basically been kicked out of Warner Brothers. And here's one of the most powerful moguls in the industry, and he's got nothing. What am I going to do with my time? Yes, I've got money, but what else? And no one's calling him. And then he was named chairman of Disney. And suddenly at this gala, everybody's going up, kissing the ring, you know, but people know it's fragile.
I have a story. When my father was head of Paramount in 1964, at Christmas, our den was packed with presents. John Wayne sent something that went all the way to the ceiling. It was unbelievable. 2 years later, when he was no longer head of the studio, at Christmas, the living room den was empty.
Oh, wow.
Empty.
Yeah.
So yes, I know it well. I know it well. So in your stories, in the Hollywood masters and the close-ups, is there an interview with an actor or a director or a producer, or all three of them, that really kind of made you say, oh, I love doing this?
Yes, I mean, several of them I've liked enormously and been very impressed with. I remember being struck not too long ago by Chadwick Boseman, because he was sitting next to me when I did the roundtables. The sort of newcomers, the people who weren't firmly stars, I'd seat them next to me, so it was less intimidating if I asked him a question. And he was very thoughtful and intelligent, and so unlike his character in Black Panther that I realized I'd fallen into the old mistake, thinking somebody is his character. And then, of course, had no idea that he was dying of cancer. And afterwards, you come back and it's a shock. And there were moments that really stand out. I mean, I remember one horrible moment. We did a filmmakers roundtable, and Julian Schnabel was on it, famous artist who also directed a really wonderful film, The Diving Bell and the Butterfly, extraordinary film. And another director was on the roundtable, and we discussed authenticity. And Julian said, well, I shot my film in French to make it more authentic. And this other director said, well, I did a film set in a foreign country and I did it in English. I didn't think it was less authentic. And he said, well, that's why your film was so lousy. And brought tears to the directors. And you're in shock going, how do I handle this? What's the next? Do I move away? Do I address it? And you have moments like that. You never quite know what's going to happen.
Oh yeah, no, I think one of my most was on the set of Rosemary's Baby, the last scene, and Polanski wanted John Cassavetes to do certain things and say certain things, and John was against it. And they got into the most horrible fight I've ever seen in my life.
Really?
I've done over 65 movies and been on the set on all of them. And it was Ruth Gordon who got in between the two of them, the wonderful Ruth Gordon, who said, "Oh, stop, you guys. Now, come on. Let's make a movie here." And just got it all settled.
What did Polanski want him to do, and how was it resolved?
It was resolved that Cassavetes had to do what Roman wanted him to do.
And he did.
If you remember in the scene, John kind of at first says, John didn't want to be there. He wanted to look away and be absolutely not part of it. But Roman wanted him to look at Mia and actually have the moment of, it's going to be okay, you know? And he didn't want, he didn't believe his character would do that.
And Cassavetes was a great actor and director, you know?
Yeah.
He knew what he was talking about. But guess what? Polanski made a brilliant film.
Yes, he did. Yes, he did.
I love those moments, and I'm always fascinated by them and the process. You know, I remember talking to Alan Ball after American Beauty had come out and won multiple Oscars. And during the editing, Sam Mendes cut the beginning and the end. And, you know, in the original, the kids are found guilty of murdering Kevin Spacey and they go to prison. And Mendes wanted a more optimistic ending. And Alan said, "You've ruined my movie. You've changed the meaning." I think later he came to see, actually, this version is better. But people are passionate. They get into fights. You know, back to Martin Ritt, one of my favorite films of his was The Spy Who Came In From the Cold, and he never talked about it. And they say, "Why not?" And he said he hated working with Richard Burton. And at one point, they virtually got into a fist fight.
Wow.
And that was one of Burton's best performances.
Yes, best. I agree. All right, so
I just
now...
have to feel, just going back to your question, some of the memorable stories are ones that I still turn over in my mind. You know, the easy ones, the ones that give you what you want, it's kind of done, you know. I had a fascinating profile of Ted Turner. I spent 3 days with him when he'd given $2 billion to the United Nations. And I remember sitting with him, and for some reason I said, "What do you have in your wallet?" By the way, journalist is as good as the questions he asks. And this was, for me, a good moment. And he took out this wallet and he had 10 $100 notes and I think an ID and a credit card. And he said, "Have you ever seen a billionaire's wallet that is this empty?" Well, I said, "I'd never seen a billionaire's wallet." So, but the ones I go over, I wrote a very difficult story about David Milch, great showrunner, writer, producer, NYPD Blue, Deadwood. And I heard that he had lost $100 million in gambling. And I often go in to speak to students. Before I came to Chapman, I go in, you know, to communications classes and walk them through it at every point. How would you have this? Where would you go? Would you write this story? Is it fair to write? And it's frighteningly easy to sway them one way or the other, you know, and you push them and you say, is this a legitimate story? Is it just a case for diction? What if you're pushing this person over the edge? Are you morally responsible for that? And a lot of people came after me and said, "Why are you writing this? He's had a problem with addiction. This poor guy, he's really suffering." I agree with all those things. Ultimately, I felt he was a public figure and $100 million is a massive amount of money. And if we are not writing some stories like this, then what are we except flax for the business? But I can't say I did it with any pleasure, and it still stays with me. And sometimes I think I regret doing that. And at other times I think, no, sometimes journalists have to be tough.
That was your job, yeah. So
I felt more and more that the ultimate question is it the truth? As opposed to us deciding what's fair for an audience to read. Have you written it fairly?
Well, journalism has changed. I mean, we won't get into politics, but some people tell the truth and some journalists are not journalists
Well,
anymore.
the Alex Jones case reveals all that. And the truth is complicated because, every instance, you're actually making a decision that affects the story. Famous case during the Franco regime, dictator in Spain, the BBC would refer to rebels as communists. So, of course, that tipped everybody against them. If you refer to them as anti-fascists, that would tip everybody in their favor. Both were true. Which one do you go with?
Yeah.
So you're constantly dealing with ethical issues in journalism. How do you tell a story? When I wrote the book about Sherry Lansing, and when she finally read it, there's a chapter about The Verdict, great film with Paul Newman. But when Sherry was making it, and her first big job as president of Fox, it was meant to be Robert Redford. And Redford was hell to work with, wouldn't show up, was in and out. It was a nightmare. And when Sherry read this, she said, by the way, you got to say, at the same time, the studio is being sold and a new owner was coming in. And I said, in narrative, I can put that before the Redford story or after it. I can't put it in the middle because it breaks up the story. And yet in real life, they were simultaneous. So you're constantly wrestling with how to tell the truth and what is it and what's fair. And sometimes you make mistakes.
Well, right now, with what happened yesterday, Trump's house was a judge said, go get the stuff. And yet some people are calling it a raid. It wasn't a raid, but that's how you tip it. That's exactly what you're talking about, Steve.
The words influence and the words you use. I was talking to reporters. We had the most horrible incident that I've had in years. One of our students died while volunteering on a USC film. And the initial headline was Chapman student killed on student film, which made it seem that it had happened here.
Yeah.
And it was awful because I was dealing with his family. I met his father at the airport and spent a lot of time with the family, the survivors. But the headline gave a misleading impression. And I'm glad to say the journalist was extremely fair in her stories. Journalists don't usually write the headlines. But I said, this is true, but the truth gives a misleading impression.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
Right.
So where did writing the book on Sherry come from? How did that come about?
Sherry had read actually the story I wrote on George Clooney and called me up, and she was thinking of writing an autobiography, and we talked about it. And what I realized is she really doesn't want to write, and she really doesn't want to say anything bad about anybody. And as I started talking to her,
always,
yes, and she's the most wonderful, I just had lunch with her yesterday, gracious, loyal person. By the way, wonderful, gracious, loyal people are very hard to write about because drama is the source of, a story. And I said, if you're doing an autobiography, you need to do as much research as for a biography. And I looked into her family's past. Her mother had fled Nazi Germany in 1938, just got out before Kristallnacht, which was a tipping point. And I managed to find 6 people who knew her mother back then. Extraordinary. By the way, if I'd waited 2 years, they wouldn't have been alive.
Yeah.
And I started getting really interested. And Sherry agreed to cooperate if I did a biography. She was extremely nervous about it. And I often laugh with her because the things when she actually read it, she was most worried about, in some ways became a high point. At one point, she's meeting Mike Myers, and she finds out that Mike Myers is about to do the sequel to Wayne's World. And the idea is based on an old British Ealing comedy. And a lawyer comes in and said, this is going to be the biggest plagiarism case you've ever seen.
Excuse me, sorry to interrupt. that was 4 weeks before shooting is when the lawyer, I was the producer.
Yeah.
Right. I produced both Wayne's World and Wayne's World 2 with.
Oh, you were involved with this too then? Wow.
So I was there for all of that stuff.
So she basically confronted him and said, you know, we will effing take your house. And Sherry thought, oh my God, people are going to read this and hate my best friend is the district attorney. They're going to think, she's going to think differently of me. So the book comes out. I said, is it the truth? You know, is the way I've written it fair? Then it must stay. Sherry's very nervous. We went to the LA Book Fair. She came too. Some of this came up and I saw her flinch next to me. And then someone in the audience raised their fist and said, go girl. And Sherry was stunned. And then she was at Paramount. A young woman came out and said, oh my God, you're a badass. And Sherry realized that for this younger generation, all the things that she's actually a bit embarrassed about were for them pioneering steps for a woman to take.
Yes.
And I think she completely reversed how she feels about some of these things. And I'm very glad about it because if anything, my view of her has only grown since I finished the book. I think
I've always thought of her as the velvet hammer.
Yeah. And she has both, but she is a deeply caring, ethical person.
Yeah.
And she turned her back on the industry. 60 years old, she left Paramount, went into the nonprofit world, became the chairman of the board of trustees of the University of California, created Stand Up to Cancer. She's a real model of what we should do in different acts of our lives, and proof that, you know, the Scott Fitzgerald line, you know, there are no second acts in American life just isn't true. You can have a second and you can have a third act.
And I tell you, this is, I think, the 36th or 37th interview I've done for The Home. I love this as much as anything I've ever done, just because I get to be with people like you.
Or you should be working for the Hollywood Reporter. We could trade places.
So now you write that book and it's successful, and you have what led you to do the one on Olivier and Vivien Leigh? I
found out at some point that the Victorian Albert Museum had bought Vivien's archive, which included 200 of letters from Olivier to Vivien. And I thought, this is a good story. And I went there, spent a few days, wrote an article about it for the Hollywood Reporter, because it was 50 years from Vivien Leigh's death. Unbearably sad. She died at 53 of tuberculosis, at a point when it was treatable and curable. And I thought, this is a book. And it wasn't. What goes into a book is interesting, because a book is a 4-year commitment. It takes a very long time to research and write, especially if you have another job. And you're going to be living with these people. And this is what I found with Sherry, that I was living with her in my mind. I used to joke with her husband, William Friedkin, I married your wife. I go home and think about her as much as you do. Now, who do you want to live with in your mind? And I looked at other book possibilities and toyed with them. One of them was Brando. There's a private Brando archive. And, you know, you're friendly, I'm sure, with Mike Medavoy, who was Brando's agent and is one of the trustees. And Mike let me in to see this private archive. And it's an amazing experience, because you go down this rundown street in Hollywood and you come to this crumbling building and you think, this can't be the right address. And you ring the bell and suddenly the garage goes and opens. You step inside and it's like 2001. Everything is metal and steel and glass. You go into this state-of-the-art elevator. It whisks you up to a floor where there's a machine where if there's a fire, it sucks out all the oxygen. And all these archives are there, including Brando's, but very hidden from the public. And I spent several weeks reading about him and reading the archive. And finally I thought, I can't live with him for 4 years. I don't like him enough, to be frank. I admire his work. I don't empathize. It's enormously important. I thought recently, as I'm looking for my next book, it would be very interesting to look at the Arthur Miller-Marilyn Monroe marriage. And Miller's archive is now at the University of Texas, and there's all sorts of stuff in there. I spent maybe 3 months. I just don't care for them enough
Well, you call it the romance of the century. Why?
Because it was up and down in an almost Aristotelian tragic path. Here, the most beautiful couple, Olivier, doesn't fall in love. It's like an obsession. He, even years later, said it was like a virus. It was like a magic potion, that nothing could stop them, even though both were married and both had kids. And leaving a spouse was pretty scandalous for stars. It was this passion, and passion is not love. And passion has love and hate, and is stronger than any rational thinking. It's not unlike an addiction. And when Olivier left his wife, she was shattered. Her hair turned white almost overnight, but she was extremely objective. And she said to her son, "I've only seen true passion once, and God help you if it ever happens to you." Because she knew that it could be creative and destructive. And he fled with Vivien in the middle of the night, and they were head over heels in love. And then the ticking time bomb started to go off, which was she was bipolar. And
they didn't call it that then.
No, they called it manic depression, but people really didn't have any of the knowledge of mental health issues that we have today. And they just regard her as an alcoholic and, you know, just difficult. And finally it was diagnosed. There was no treatment. Now we have lithium.
Yeah.
And so you have the magical first 10 years and then the horrible decline. All across, you know, 2 world wars and the golden age of Hollywood and the rise of the 60s, which makes it an epic story. But at the end.
I read the book. It was an amazing book. Everybody should get it. But her youth was quite horrible, and what her family did to her and sent her to the convent and everything. Do you think that that's what caused that illness, and obviously I think helped make her a great actress, or do you think that was there before?
Great questions. There's a lot of debate, and I spoke to some of the leading experts on bipolar at Oxford University, Stanford, the head of the Bipolar Disorders Clinic, and asked them these questions. There's a lot to indicate that bipolar has genetic roots. And one thing I found was that Vivien's great uncle was incarcerated actually in the Calcutta lunatic asylum. Her family was Anglos in India, and with very similar traits. What tips it from being a genetic element into active is very debated. Did that play a role? I think quite possibly. You know, she was taken away from her parents at 6.5, put in this very strict convent boarding school, incredibly lonely and isolated. Later, she came to like it, but it was a very, very difficult time. Now, did that feed into acting? I think both did. I think her mental health issues did. And I think the pain feeds you as an artist. It's one of the only good professions where you can turn your pain into something worthwhile. There's no doubt, and there's no doubt that the pain that the Vivien and Larry experienced fed his work in a way that I find more direct than almost any other artist I've ever come across. He would take this and use it as the grounds of his art. I spoke to this wonderful actress, Rosemary Harris, extraordinary British actress. She'd worked with him. She played Ophelia when he directed Hamlet. And in the mad scene, he kept pushing her to the breaking point till she couldn't take it anymore. And then very quietly he said, "This is what it was like. I've been there."
Well, I don't know if I was lucky enough or I just happened to be there, but Bob Evans had asked me to come in and right the ship on Marathon Man, because it was, when I showed up, they'd been shooting for 10 days and they were 10 days behind.
Wow.
That's a story.
Why?
But
why were they so far behind?
It's in my book, but it really was Schlesinger couldn't make up his mind. Dustin was rewriting. Connie Hall was trying to be the director. It was all a mission. Nobody was there to say, this is what we're going to do. And I was lucky enough at 29 and had the courage to speak up to everybody. And we changed all that. We lost one day in the rest of the shooting.
And you were
working at APA, I was there at the moment where Dustin was totally screwing up at the end, and actually heard Larry say, you know, Dustin, why don't you just try acting? Which is a famous.
Oh, you act? Yes. Say it. Wow.
I was there, but I have one Olivier story that I want to tell you quickly. Just when he showed up, Evans, you know, you couldn't get cast insurance on him because he had cancer, and so nobody would hire him. And Evans said, I don't care. He's playing the role of Zell in Marathon Man. And when he showed up, the first scene we did was in front of the Delacorte clock in the Central Park Zoo. And he showed up literally like, think of a balloon that's maybe an eighth full. And as he walked on the set, the wardrobe person said, here, Larry, Sir Laurence, you know, here's your coat. And the prop man said, which watch would you like? And Schlesinger came up and said, now, Larry, let's talk about the scene. And Dustin said something. And all of a sudden you started to see him become the actor. And as every day that we shot in New York, he got more and more confident. And we got to LA, and it was about the second or third day of shooting. And it was a very long day, and I was exhausted. And Olivier was coming out as I was coming out of the stage. And he said, what are you doing tonight, my boy? And I said, I'm going home to go to sleep. What are you doing? He said, oh, Bob and Natalie have, you know, RJ and Natalie have invited me over. We're having a dinner party. And you could see that he had become the Olivier that all of us, you know, loved.
Yes.
So that's
he
just
was very stricken by extraordinary health problems when he was older. And I wish I'd met him, and I especially wish I'd seen him on stage. I didn't. One of my mentors growing up was one of his closest friends. And, you know, one of the issues writing the book, you always having to make up your mind, or if there's contradictory evidence, you discuss it, was his sexuality. There was a biography that came out, I think in the late 80s, that said he was bisexual, gay, and I had to make up my mind about that. And I concluded that he wasn't. You know, I think possibly people are on a spectrum, and it's very hard to look back and interpret letters that were written, and is this evidence or is it not? You know, and the one thing I remember was this friend of mine, mentor of mine, who'd been his friend, who himself was gay and very openly so at a time when people weren't, was always adamant that Olivier was not. And this was the horse's mouth, you know.
Yeah. Well, I was around him, and I certainly didn't get that vibe. Let's talk for a moment, because you've been such a great proponent of diversity. And tell me why you got involved with that. I mean, it started out, I know, as you said earlier, in South Central. What made you, I mean, I know when I was president of the Academy, and I realized this was in 2012, how few Blacks and women we had. And I made a whole start of it, and other things obviously have happened now, but did it come to you at the Reporter? How did it happen?
Well, I've always been interested in that nexus of particularly poverty and education, because I do believe education is the route forward. I'm actually helping a friend of mine who lives in South Central, who has a lovely 8-year-old girl, trying to find a way to get her into a really good school. Because I can see she's a very, very bright little girl, very studious. And I said, you're very intelligent. And she said to me, what does intelligent mean? And this is entirely the education, and she loves
Right.
reading. It's so unfair, and our system is so unfair. What happened quite a few years ago is one day I thought, I know this is shameful. I live in LA. I'd never seen the Watts Towers because I was afraid to go into the so-called hood. Mm-hmm. And I did. And I'm a journalist. I got out, started talking to people, and I started going all over LA. I wanted to know my own city. And the disparity I saw between the way people were living in one area and another a few miles away was shocking. And so when I was at the Reporter, I said, what if we create a mentorship program to go with, we'd have an annual Women in Entertainment Gala that was a very big deal. What if we made that more relevant by pairing women who've succeeded with girls who want to succeed? And it's the only thing I've ever done where the result exceeded even my wildest dreams. And I've seen some of these girls go on to work at Netflix, at Warner Brothers, at ICN, and think of careers that they would never otherwise have heard of, go to universities they would not have aspired to go to. And they got me very involved. And we would go into a dozen schools. I would go in, do presentations, along with big brothers and sisters, interview the kids. I would find the mentors, top level women, Jennifer Salke, who's the head of Amazon Studios, Dana Walden, who's one of the top executives at Disney. And then you'd match them, and the matching was very important. And you'd see these girls rise. And then we started raising scholarship money, which is critical, because a lot of them come from families that are terrified of the thought of getting into any kind of debt. Mm-hmm. And at some point, something tipped, and I was more interested in that than I was in the day-to-day activities of Hollywood.
Wow. Well, you've done an amazing job. You should be very, very proud.
I'm proud, but I'm more proud of especially the women who become mentors, because it's not always easy to take on responsibility for a teenager. I'm kind of scared of it myself. And there's always a baggage that comes with it. You know, we had one girl who did very, very well. And at one point she was speaking to a mentor who's a very well-known agent, and talking about all her money problems. And of course, the mentor wanted to give her money. And I said, no, teach her to make money. And it's, but it's very hard to say, no, I can't help you with this problem because we must have a different kind of relationship. So being a mentor is an amazing thing. I would really urge everybody to look at organizations like Big Brothers, like Boys and Girls Club, which is wonderful. And you can change a life. And if you change one life, you're actually changing a family and friends and a street and a community.
Good for you. Good for you. Yes, it needs someone like you to push to people and have the contacts to be able to do it.
And raise money, because these things cost money.
Yes. So I'm bringing, Freda's come in. Here we are. There's Freda. You've heard of Nunnally Johnson, I'm sure.
Of course.
This Freda is married to Nunnally's son.
Oh, wow.
Yes.
Did you know Nunnally?
You're muted. You're muted. You're muted, Freda.
Yes, get thee to a Nunnally.
Yeah. Paraphrase.
We usually have believe it or not, our time is almost up. Oh. This has been an amazing hour. Thank you so much.
Koch, really.
Freda is going to. We have a question that
I think in part Freda was jumping on to talk about mentorship.
You're exactly right.
Oh, go ahead.
Okay.
We're going to have to talk, Stephen, a little bit about mentorship, because we are starting a program here implementing retirees from the entertainment industry. Because when we first started it and called around to different internship programs, the missing link was having somebody who had life experience that was no longer there, and it wasn't for making connections or networking, but to give the mentee that body of experience that the retiree has. So we should discuss.
And by the way, you should actually talk Sherry Lansing, because one of the initiatives that she spearheads in her foundation is getting retirees into the workforce, often as teachers. But that's an issue that she's very involved with. And by the way, one of the terrible things in the industry is ageism. You know, it's an awful thing that people are just pushed out when they have great experience and judgment and know-how.
Right. So we're working on that. But the reason why I came back, Jen, who runs Creative Chaos, usually comes in at the end and asks our guests 2 questions. And this is, I think, particularly wonderful in this case because you are so story-driven and love the written word, whether it's journalism or screenwriting. What is your favorite movie? And what is your favorite TV show?
2 very different answers. My favorite movie, and again, going back to what I was saying, Hawk, the ones you see as a teenager live with you and become part of you in a different way, is an Italian film directed by Luchino Visconti called The Leopard. And if anybody hasn't seen it, I know you have, only watch it on a big screen and only watch the Italian version with Burt Lancaster dubbed into Italian. Sidney Pollack was hired to oversee the English language version. And he said, it's just impossible to recreate it in English. But it's epic, it's a period piece, has beautiful acting, it's ultimately romantic and tragic, and pathetic to say I like stories that end sadly. I don't know why. When I was writing a book about Sherry Lansing, it was always very frustrating to me. I saw her stepping down from Paramount as a very sad thing. She saw it as a great thing. She was moving on to chapter 3. So I'd say The Leopard. The television show that stamped me, still stamps a lot of people, as a child, when there wasn't much on, and you watch, you know, the children's hour, which in fact was only 45 minutes or so, and then the rest of 50 minutes would be made up of an image of a swan circling on the lake, because the BBC had no money. But they created the most remarkable science fiction show I've ever seen. And I was in love with the lead actor, who was like my grandfather, and terrified by the show, and it was Doctor Who. And years later, I was talking to my then girlfriend about the episode where he sort of dies. I think they call it regeneration. And I managed to track part of it, because I don't think the whole thing exists, on YouTube. And there it was again, this old man collapsing and regenerating someone else. And it was my first experience of loss and death. And I was heartbroken. And you play that moment again, and the music is rising and he's falling. And it's still incredibly effective. And what we see merges with our dreams, our aspirations, our goals, everything. So that.
Boy, do I want to spend more time with you, Stephen.
Oh, thank you. Me too. We must have that dinner with your wife. I would really love to.
Yes, we'll definitely put it together. Yes. Thank you. Thanks, everybody. 2 weeks from today, I'm going to be interviewing one of the great actor-producers, Academy Award winner Tony Bill.
Oh, I love Tony.
So, yeah, great guy. Great guy. Thank you again, Stephen. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for joining us.
I want you all to ask the same questions, so when we get together, you'll have to tell me. Good, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Hawk.